You're live, Chairman.
Good evening and welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, meeting on Thursday the 7th of December 2023. My name is Councillor Simon Morgan and I'm the Chairperson of this committee. Members, we are streaming this meeting live as well as recorded, and by being present in the meeting, you are giving your consent to being recorded. During each item, please put your hand up to indicate if you wish to speak. I will then invite you at the appropriate time. Could I ask members to avoid approaching the top table, as this could create interference with the cameras and live stream. Please note that the YouTube live stream sound recording is dependent on the correct use of the microphones. Therefore, can I ask that when invited to speak, you remember to turn on your microphone and turn it off when finished. Please reference a page or paragraph number when referring to the agenda papers and keep your contributions as clear and concise as possible. So, moving on, apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Berna?
Yes, Chairman. We've received apologies for absence from Councillor Hughes.
Thank you. Okay, moving on, item 3, the minutes of the last meeting. Those obviously been circulated to members. Have any members any particular comments? Well, I actually do have one, and that is regarding the process improvement framework, which I believe we're now part of. What's happened about that? I haven't heard hide nor hair or anything about it.
I haven't heard anything further either. It is on my list of things to do, very long list, to find out, well, what next? What happens now? So, yes, that's with me, I suppose, to do that.
Okay, thanks. I'm glad it's you. Right. Okay, moving on then, public participation. And there's no public participation as far as I'm aware. Is that right, Villa?
No.
No, thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry, just 1 second. Moving, Councillor White, I'm sorry, I should have welcomed you to our committee at first. Good to see you here.
Thank you, Chairman. And I was just asking if it was okay if I could comment on.
Oh, well, obviously you can put your hand up at the appropriate time.
Okay, thank you very much.
Right. In fact, I think. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stevens. Yes.
I might have missed it. I know we just had that word about what was happening next on that, but did we actually agree the minutes of the meeting?
Ah, good point. Anyone? Right. Is that, those minutes agreed? Yes. Yeah. Agreed. Thanks. Right. Right. So, moving on to agenda item 6, scrutiny work plan item, planning decision making, and the report on pages 9 to 14. And this will be presented by Mr. Jennings. Mr. Jennings, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. This matter on the scrutiny work plan has been looked at by the committee for getting on for a year now. And the committee previously made some recommendations to council which were accepted and have been implemented, but arising from the early consideration by the committee, there were 1 or 2 other matters left unattended, you might say, and the committee has since picked that up and given it detailed consideration, both at a previous meeting of the committee and at least 2 meetings of its working group. And these 2 matters involve, firstly, the introduction of what has become known as a constitutional intervention or break. But quite simply, that means introducing something into the Constitution that enables, as a matter of course and as a matter of procedure, for there to be a deferment when, in consideration of a planning application, as a planning committee, members are minded to overturn the recommendation of the officers. This gives the intervention and a break on proceedings to enable particular consideration to be given to whatever technical, legal, constitutional or other considerations should be brought to bear on the matter, and the matter brought back to a committee at a later date to avoid delay, probably at a special meeting of the relevant committee that can be reconvened at an earlier date to finally determine the matter. But I would just emphasise that the working group wanted, out of all of the options for dealing with this intervention or break, for the option involving deferment to be the preferred one, and that is indeed in the recommendation in this report. The second item is the introduction of technical briefings and presentations on applications to be used fairly rarely, I think, has been concluded. And this will be a separately organised briefing and presentation by officers to members of the relevant planning committee on particular complex and technical issues. This will not in any way take the place of or be extra to what will be available and provided to members at the committee meeting itself, but it gives another opportunity for members to look at particular issues arising from a complex or technical application. In Appendix A to this report, there are some brief guidelines around how this should happen. And again, this can be weaved into the constitutional arrangements for the workings of the committee or the operational protocol for the committees. And for that reason, in both cases, the working group have commended this to the committee for onward reference to council via the Performance, Governance and Audit Committee, simply to consider and formulate the constitutional implications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. I'm minded that there's going to be a lot of discussion about this, in particular with the advent of our guest tonight. And so one thing I want to just establish is a bit of the practicalities about this, particularly in the way that this break is going to be exercised. I mean, so are we having a situation where in a planning committee, if after the discussions has been happened, does the chairman then call, if for example the recommendation is for refusal, does he then call that is the committee minded to approve this, and a show of hands is then given, and at that moment that is when the break will be instituted? Is that sort of how we see that? Is that's sort of how you saw it being exercised?
I guess so, Chairman. That there would have to be a clear mindset of the committee to go against the officer's recommendation. Now, whether that is a general indication from views expressed around the table or from a proposition that is made, but of course there won't be a decision at that point. It will be a minded to. So this will actually break the proceedings before a final decision is made. So yes, it is a minded to position.
Right. Okay. Thank you. So opening the yes, Councillor Morley.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand this. So it really is, if we go against the officer's decision.
If we're minded to.
If we're minded to, I'm trying to put it in plain English. Is there a cost to this then for the council to go over it again? And what is the period of?
Well, that's a very good question, I suppose.
And
that's
are we then going to add another cost which the council obviously doesn't need?
Obviously, there would need to be another meeting.
Right.
Yes. Yeah.
And then what happens when it comes back and we still agree with our decision?
Presumably the advice would have been given, and it's then a question of whether the committee is continuing to not just be minded, but to actually vote.
So how many goes do you get at it? That's
Just the one.
right. Okay.
Yeah.
It's just the.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that.
That's
very
thank you.
I would say that two things occur to me really reading this again, and I think the more times you read it, probably the more things occur to you. But with regard to being minded to overturn an officer's decision, constitutionally, could we possibly would there be an option whereby the committee could decide whether they wanted to go down the constitutional break route or not, if you see what I mean? So I can think of examples where there were members who were minded to want a deferral because of the seriousness of the situation, so that it could be re-examined, and others where members were very, very sure about what they wanted, regardless of that. So that's just something that I would wonder whether that was possible constitutionally for the committee to have that as an option, rather than it would automatically go to constitutional break, so that the constitutional break would be optional depending on the situation. And the other thing was just some clarity around, so one of the things, particularly on more minor applications, I have seen, as others will have done, is where an officer recommendation is overturned so that we approve rather than refuse. And obviously I wouldn't particularly see the point in those, I think that would be probably very unwise for numerous reasons to have any kind of constitutional break when it's the other way round. And it just occurred to me that that's not 100% clear in the report. So just those 2 points really. Thank you.
Councillor Morley.
Yeah, just if I can just come back, I think we can defer anyway, can't we? We've got that.
It's in the constitution.
Is there a model of this being done in other committees, other councils?
Yes, there is. There is. That was
right.
Okay. I think we produced examples, did we not, Stuart? In the previously, did you not come forward with some other examples of that where that has happened in other councils?
Not so much examples, Chairman, but I mean this is drawn from sort of similar sort of practices occurring, but it's very difficult to draw clear comparisons because of the different structures in planning committee structures in place in other authorities.
Right. Councillor White, did you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me to speak and allowing me to, at your committee. Basically, I've got a few questions. The first one is that I've read this, that the reason for it is to reduce costs when appeals are allowed. And I've been searching today, and I've got a whole load of them here. And the majority of overturns at committees are for approvals. And most of them, barring a couple of anomalies where the costs have been allowed, has been the major planning applications. Well, for me, those large planning applications, we have great big long technical reports. Officers do long reports before the meetings. So to defer it again, it means that all the big applications that we may have turned down, they'd have to come back again for another go. And I know at North West, when we've deferred meetings, they've come back. And actually, we've been more unanimous the second time around out of anger that officers refuse to issue the decision notice. So they already do this, and they already have the option to do it. Basically, if we remove the large apps, what you're saying is it will have to go to another committee, which surely is going to have a cost. We can already defer decisions to another committee. South East recently did this, so it's already in the constitution. The other thing is, has already been touched on, you're saying that if we disagree with officers, it will have to be referred to another meeting. Well, what's the cost of this? Because officers are already trying to say we don't want area planning committees because they're too expensive. So I estimate at North West, every time we have a meeting, there will be several more meetings following that meeting when we've overturned the officer's decision to approve, like Purley Barnes which we approved, and they refused to issue the decision notice for another month. Claremont Garden Centre was another one that they refused to issue the decision notice because they didn't want a cafe at a garden centre. So how much is all these additional meetings going to cost, and can everybody who works get to them? So, why can't we retain the status quo? And the other thing is, for me, as an elected member, the main thing people are interested in is planning, whether people vote for you or against you. And lastly, there's been a very recent judicial review, and I know this personally, in the last few weeks of Maldon District Council, and they were advised by Simon Quelch and the head of planning that an application could not be determined under section 73A. However, a barrister did a judicial review, and immediately they received that judicial review, Maldon District Council rolled over and had to pay costs on that decision. So how do we know that the legal decisions we're getting are going to be correct and accurate? I mean, for me, I'm interested to have those questions answered, but for me, we're on here as democratic elected people. And as far as I'm concerned, mostly we overturn to approve at North West. But if we do refuse a big application, we do it for the best reasons, hand on heart, because we think it's the best decision. And to take away that democracy, to me, just does not sit well. And it's why I've come here tonight when I saw this on the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, Leslie.
So the reason that this was brought forward was following a request by Councillor Fluker, actually looking at decisions that were made, and particularly around a decision where the council incurred very heavy costs. And I think, and I could be corrected if I'm wrong, because I wasn't a member then, but my understanding is that that came from a decision that was made, and then there was a further discussion and advice, and the committee then agreed that that application could be approved, but because the decision had already been made or issued, it couldn't be withdrawn, and therefore the developer still went ahead with the appeal. And I think we all know the one I'm talking about, and therefore a lot of money was lost. So I think that's where, in looking at all this, and I remember this from last year, this is where the constitutional break idea came. I see it slightly different personally from a deferment, because I think and I understand we already have the possibility of deferral, but when I was talking about it being optional, I know we already have that option to defer, but this was something a bit stronger, I think, in terms of getting the advice on whether or not, what the implications would be. And what I was trying to say was, if members were absolutely minded that whatever the implications were, then maybe that could be overridden. But I can think of at least one case where some members, quite a few members, I think, were worried that they weren't fully sure about what the implications were. But it does take, it is on the report. We do look at the fact that we shouldn't be taking into account some of the implications, only in terms of planning law. So it is complex, but I do that's just really giving background for why we're looking at it. And that's why the status quo has been examined, was because members raised that as a concern. Thank you.
Anybody? I'm just thinking, Mr. Jennings, that we probably need. My thoughts are, members can decide, is that we probably need a bit more work on this in terms of actually bottoming out the practicalities, the practical way that this would work, before we decide. Decide to send it. I'm happy to send it if everyone wants to do it now, but I think there's a little bit more to be done on this in terms of the detail.
I just wonder if it's worth us separating out the part where we're looking at the technical presentations and taking that forward now, and then doing some more work possibly on the deferment, because the technical presentations are separate from that, and I'm not sure that they're as controversial, are they? Because it's just about members having more information. It's just a thought.
Well, just I think hopefully we've got the procedure right. I think we want to perhaps put the current recommendation that we get to send this as it currently stands to PG&A. Does everyone those in favour? Those against? Right, good. So do we have my proposal that I now propose that this go back and be deferred for further discussion. Do we have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Right. So on that basis, do I have those in favour? Those against? Right, thank you, that's carried. Right, Mr. Jennings, and then I think in the course of doing that, we can consider before going forward as to whether we, as you say, separate those two out.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right. So, moving on, agenda item 7, scrutiny work plan item on planning enforcement, pages 15 and 16 of the report. Again, Mr. Jennings, you want to introduce this?
Yes, Chairman, thank you. The working group and the committee have over several months been looking at planning enforcement as a scrutiny work plan item and have received a lot of data, information and explanations on resourcing, processes and performance. And gradually over that period, I think it's fair to say, and hopefully this report reflects what the working group at least have felt, that things are on a much better track now, particularly on resources and performance, to the point where not having identified any particular area that requires detailed scrutiny, this item can at least be removed from the scrutiny work plan, but nevertheless kept on as a watching brief for periodic review by the working group, particularly having regard to the impending redrafting and consideration of the planning enforcement policy, which obviously the working group and your committee will wish to have a close involvement with. So that's essentially the recommendation reflecting the considered views of the working group.
Thank you. So we have recommendations. Anyone have anything they want to add to that? Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. I'm not quite clear how this sort of working brief will really work. Will we have this on the agenda every time that we look at it or something? So I think otherwise it's just going to get lost and forgotten. It's either got to be on an agenda to keep an eye on it, or it's not, and then it won't get watched. Yeah. And I say that particularly because we used to get I can't remember, a monthly bulletin, I suppose, on enforcement, and we had a long time when enforcements weren't being done, and we now have access to the Phoenix mapping, and I have a diary entry to look at that every month, the same as I used to look at the report that came every month. Fine, but the mapping only shows me what's been closed up to or since May or something. There's a fixed date, which was May this year, and that date never moves. So to start with, it was interesting and useful, but the further away from May we go, the less useful that is. So I can't any longer really see what's progressing. But I know from conversations with planning enforcement that things are progressing, but I can't see it. So I'm not quite clear how we can keep a watching brief. Thank you.
Okay. Yep. That's
So I think one of the important things, I mean, I agree actually, Councillor Stevens, that I think we would need to make sure that this did come back. And I know when we had, Ms Hughes might be able to help me here, when we had a watching brief on parks, the Parks Department, that did come back periodically with a report. So I think maybe we'd have to set some sort of boundary on how often it came back. As part, maybe I would suggest as part of the motion that we look at altering it to suggest a time frame for how often it comes back with a report to us. So that would then keep that going. But also, I think I'm slightly concerned because the important point with regard to the planning enforcement policy was us being able to take part in the review, and I'm a little bit worried that that might get lost, because if you recall, members, and I don't, you know, not all members will recall this, but the ones that were here, one of the things that we looked at was timeframes around various types of enforcement. So, for example, things that are urgent and what the expectation would be. So if we're looking at trees or listed buildings, and the current enforcement policy wasn't where it should be with regard to that. So I think, and actually we've got a little note there. So I think that it would be good to have some sort of time frame around when we're actually having this brought back, so that it doesn't just vanish. I agree.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, Mr. Jennings, how would you see the watching brief actually operate as such?
Well, the watching brief is exactly that, for the committee or the working group to make up its to decide how it wishes to keep it under regular review. And then, having done that, the working group, and then reporting periodically to the committee, can receive the same level of information or targeted information that it has enjoyed receiving in the recent past. So all I would say is the working group is meeting a lot more regularly than it was done, that it had previously. So perhaps on a monthly basis might be unduly regular, unless it was a particular thing that the members wish to keep a regular eye on. So it really is we're in members' hands on that one. Right,
thank you. Yep, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. I think, considering what Councillor Spenceley's just said, quarterly sounds good, but actually I think that's too far apart and things will just get lost. We've got the mapping, but that doesn't give you the metrics for the whole district. If you look at the whole district, all you're seeing is just lots of dots on a map. If you zoom into your own area, obviously you can focus a bit more and you can get more of an understanding of your own ward. But I don't have a picture anymore of how good or bad the situation is, and I think I'd like to see some statistics at every meeting, really, a brief report showing how many new enforcements are now on the list, how many have been closed because we couldn't do anything about them because we'd let too much time elapse, how many have been closed because we successfully enforced, that sort of thing. Doesn't need to be a great detailed report, just at least some numbers would be helpful.
Thank you. Mr. Winslow, I think you want to come in and talk about the mapping specifically.
Well, yes, thank you, Chair. Just a clarification on how frequently the enforcement application is updated. And I can see why there is a degree of confusion, because when I just checked following what Councillor Stevens said, I was also confused from that. So the enforcement data, I have checked with Ms. Walthoff-Shawland as well. The enforcement data on the mapping system is updated daily from from Uniform, which is the planning management case management system that manages the enforcement applications that planning enforcement use. It's updated Monday to Friday. Obviously, there's a lag over anything that's sort of received in over the weekend, and takes a bit of time to get that on. And if there is any misunderstanding on that, we can get some communication out to all members, just reminding that information is updated more frequently. In respects, if I may, Chair, in respects of the suggestion that's just come in about some more, I suppose, more pertinent information about how general planning enforcement is going in terms of the metrics of it, really. That, of course, is something which we can provide, and it's relatively easy for us to do. So there's no sort of pressing issues with that.
So you would be quite capable of producing on a monthly basis a report that could be considered by the working groups, etc.
Yeah, we can do them monthly. Whether you'll see too much change on a monthly basis,
no, that's
obviously, but that will only time will tell with that. But yeah, that is okay.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, mine really is, gosh, about 12 years ago, we used to have a monthly enforcement update, or certainly quarterly enforcement update. And as members, we could call to the end of the planning committee anything that we were particularly concerned about in our ward, and we'd go through those in detail. And the other thing I wanted to say is, do we still have the harm matrix? And I actually emailed Richard Holmes to tell him I was coming tonight because of an issue that's in my ward. And I'm going to bore you with a little story about it. In 2012, Kismet Kebabs had built loads of illegal buildings, nothing had planning. And they came to us and said, we're really sorry, we don't understand English planning laws. If you approve this, we'll approve the whole thing. So we did approve it. We approved all these legal buildings. That was fine. 2015, they applied for an accommodation block, which got refused. And then in 2021, we had an application come to Northwest that was to approve an accommodation block that had no planning, 3 or 4 other buildings that had no planning.
Sorry,
but the worst thing, when I'm getting to the harm matrix.
Councillor White, sorry, I fully understand the situation, but I don't think this is actually appropriate.
But what I wanted to get to is that this has been going on all this time, and it said if we approved it, they would fix the main problem. And what it was, there's a fan that discharges into the residential garden, and it has a noise abatement order. It failed the noise test, and it's really stinky, and it goes into a residential garden. And they could easily reroute it. And so far, they haven't done that.
White, sorry, I don't think it's appropriate to go into an individual case.
Well, do we still have the harm when they look at enforcement? Do they take the harm into account? Because nothing's happened with this since 2021.
Well, I think that's a matter for Mr. Winslow. Can you comment on that?
So, in terms of the harm matrix sort of principle, this will be coming through the updated enforcement policy, because obviously that's what members will apply when they're determining which breaches or potential breaches of planning control various sort of forms of action should be taken against. So, in terms of so that's being written at the moment, and we hope that the enforcement policy obviously will be with members for discussion through the working groups early next year.
Thank you. Right, members. Therefore, on that basis, the recommendation is that it be dropped out and a watching brief be continued. Is that agreed? Yeah. Good. Right. Good. Moving on to right, the next agenda item 8, Mutiny Scrutiny Request, Maldon Citizens Advice. Again, Mr. Jennings, are you going to? Can you lead us in on this, or is it?
Well, very briefly, Chairman. This is a matter which the committee and through its working group took up as a result of a member request, care of yourself, Chairman, asking to look at certain issues arising from a visit and some discussions with the Citizens Advice that at the time. More recently, the working group had a very detailed report on the involvement of this council with that body, and some financial implications were of particular interest to the working group, and the result is that it's been commended to this committee to onwardly commend to council what the financial implications of the contractual arrangement with MCR are, and the excellent value of the money delivered by way of supporting a wide range of council services. The principal reason for commending all the information which is contained in the appendix to this report to council is that the contract is due to be reviewed early next year, and the working group feel that there is much here to be borne in mind when that is done. And the point of this report is to endorse the conclusions of the working group and refer it to council.
Thank you. Ms Green, do you want to comment on that at all?
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully the report that we provided to the working group gives a very clear picture of the very high value that the Maldon citizens advice provides both for the council and also for the council taxpayers of the district. We've recently had some further information from them in terms of sort of the total numbers that they have assisted, and I don't know if that would help the committee just to put into context some of the support that they provide. So for the last financial year, over 3,000 local residents were assisted with 12,000 separate issues. The Citizens Advice assisted our local residents to obtain 1.7 million additional income through various opportunities, including additional benefits. They assisted nearly 500 people who were in fuel poverty. They supported 850 residents to access online services. They assisted 238 people where they were presenting as homeless. Probably one of the really key things for us is the fact that for last year, the level of funding that both us and the Essex County Council provided amounted to 33% of their total cost of running service. So 2/3 of the cost of service is met through external funding or fundraising. Now that compares with 10 years ago, where the Citizen Advice were reliant on 90% of their funding was provided either by this council or Essex County Council. So in the course of 10 years, they have worked really hard to reduce their reliance on the funding directly from local authorities and find other sources of funding, which I think is very commendable. So hopefully, members, that will assist the committee in considering the recommendations in the report.
Thank you. Right, members, so we have the recommendation, little one, that the committee endorses the conclusions of its working group and refers to the council the findings of this scrutiny as detailed in the briefing paper at Appendix A to the report. And little two, that members' attention is drawn to the financial implications of the contractual arrangement with Maldon Citizens Advice and the excellent value for money delivered by way of supporting a wide range of council services, so that this is borne in mind when the contract is reviewed next year. Is that agreed? Okay, right. Okay, moving on to agenda item 9, future health provision in Maldon and the proposed new Maldon Health Hub. Just to give a bit of context to this, there used to be specific overview and scrutiny meetings set for partner challenge, including National Health Service and Health, but these have not taken place for some time. It is within the terms of reference of the committee to receive reports and other evidence from public bodies, organisations and individuals which the committee or a working group considers relevant to its work. Now, Councillor Spencer and I became aware that members' concerns have been raised, particularly around the loss of healthcare provision and future health provision coming forwards for the district. And it is felt that this committee can provide a forum for members' concerns to be raised and updated reports on this subject to be received. And so both myself and the Vice Chair would like to seek your approval, committee approval, to add this as a work plan item and suggest that we invite the NHS onto the next working group meeting to highlight the information we would like and set up an additional extraordinary meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee focusing on health scrutiny. Is this agreed? Thank you. Good. Sorry. Oh, sorry, Councillor Stevens.
Thank you. Yes, I do agree, but I just wanted to ask a question, please, if I may.
Yeah.
So we've had a couple of meetings with the NHS recently, and I just wondered if that will now become part of this, or is that going to carry on separately? Because that would seem a bit daft if it carried on separately.
Well, it would be, yes. No, I was thinking, my view is that would be the main way of doing it, but yeah, that's my understanding, and certainly Mr. Donnelly was looking forward to coming and speaking to us.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. So moving on to item 10, scrutiny work plan item, the cyber security update. That's pages 23 and 24 of the report. Again, Mr. Jennings, can you take us to it?
Yes, Chairman. This was originally brought to this committee on reference from the Performance Governance and Audit Committee back in September last year, with a request that the audit and technical reports available at that time be reviewed. The committee agreed to add it to its scrutiny work plan, and in March, having seen the technical reports and audit reports and the schedules of the progress made in a number of detailed areas at that time, further agreed to accept by way of reassurance the update. But it was known at that time that there were matters still to come forward in a pending internal audit report. And of course, as this report indicates, time has moved on with this, and as recently as the 16th of November, the Performance Governance and Audit Committee received an internal audit report on this, and apart from a couple of other matters which were updated, at the meeting, it was noted at the PGA committee that the council had substantial assurance on cyber security. So, and it details those other matters which were dealt with and updated at the time. So I think this report essentially marks time on something that was added to the scrutiny work plan over a year ago, and really the assurance has been provided through the work done at the outset and the internal audit report submitted to the BGA committee in November. So unless there's anything that this committee wishes to identify and seek further scrutiny on, then I think time has passed it by, and the matter of cyber security can be deleted from the scrutiny work plan at this time, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. So, members, the recommendation is that the cyber security be deleted from the scrutiny work plan. Is that approved? Good. Okay. So, moving on to agenda item 11, scrutiny work plan item, safeguarding of children and vulnerable adults, corporate risk update, and we're delighted to see Mr. Geller here too, who can give us his report.
Thank you, members. Just to provide a quick update in relation to the work plan. So just to give a bit of context, so in October 2022, Maldon District Council underwent a follow-up safeguarding audit. There was a previous one in July 2020. Now, the follow-up review ranged from our general safeguarding activities to a small number of reviews on our cases. And at the conclusion, the following recommendations were made: that the council ensure that it maintains a list of volunteer organisations, that the council compile a list of contractors, that all required attendees to the safeguarding forum be reminded of their duties to attend, to introduce an action tracker to the safeguarding meeting, and to update the safeguarding policy designating safeguarding officer list, and to regularly review on an annual basis the safeguarding policy. So by way of update, I can say that with points 1 and 2, so that's the volunteer organisations and the list of contractors, a volunteers list and a contractors list has been set up with advice from procurement. Officers across the council can now access that spreadsheet to maintain and update the list, with overall responsibility resting with departmental managers. Safeguarding lead, so that would be myself, engages with the volunteer agencies and contractors to check their own safeguarding processes, if they have one for themselves, if not, that they should adopt our one. In terms of point 3, so requiring all attendees to the safeguarding forum to be reminded of their responsibilities to attend. Now, this is partly the reason why this action came to ONS. There was a large number of designated safeguarding officers, and because there was a large number of designated safeguarding officers, attendance at the safeguarding forum tended to be low. And so because of that, I raised the risk likelihood by 1 point from 1 to 2, and as a result, that's how it came to ONS in the first place. We've now updated the designated safeguarding officers list, and I've also changed it slightly so that it's now a tiered system. So all the designated safeguarding officers are trained to a more senior level. Tier 1 officers are the ones that are required to attend the safeguarding meetings, allowing for sickness and annual leave. The Tier 2 officers can attend on a more ad hoc basis. That frees up a bit more time. Now, this approach has obviously reduced staffing demand for the safeguarding forum, and it allows a number of key officers to attend as and when they need to, as opposed to being required to do so. And there's also a renewed understanding now of who the designated safeguarding officers are. Now, I've been monitoring this over the past couple of forums, and the next one pending, if the attendance still remains positive, I'll be reducing that likelihood from 2 back down to 1. In terms of introducing an action tracker to the safeguarding meeting, that was very easy to do and has been done, and it's been in place since August, and it's referenced at all the safeguarding meetings that are occurring. In terms of updating the designated safeguarding officers list, I've said that that's been done, but also to review the safeguarding policy regularly. I can assure that the safeguarding policy is discussed regularly at the safeguarding forum. What can be improved, what do we need to be mindful of? Having said that, the safeguarding policy does need to be refreshed, and that's work that I've got planned for 24-25. Just some other quick notes for your own benefit. Our back office system management is working well, and it's allowing officers to quickly review, action and close any safeguarding referrals made. To give you an indication, we've had 62 safeguarding referrals over the last 6 months, all of which have been handled, processed and closed. In terms of the safeguarding meeting attendance, again, just for information, the October meeting, we had 6 out of the 9 Tier 1 officers, and again, at the meeting that was on the 6th of the 12th, so yesterday, there was also 6 out of 9 there. So for me, the safeguarding audit conditions have been satisfied as best they can, and for me, it moves on to business as usual. The next points of work for me are to refresh the safeguarding policy. There's some extra training for staff around some of the forms that we use, and I'm looking to try and update the intranet and with a couple of supporting bits of information that can aid decision making. So that's where we are with the safeguarding work.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. So in terms of staffing levels, are you happy that you're sort of got enough people to do what needs to be done?
Yes, absolutely. I think the problem was before it was almost too wide.
Right.
And so that's where some of the issues were with attendance. But now that it's been made more concise and split into tiers, that gives a lot more clarity.
Okay. Councillor Spencer?
So just a couple of things. Thanks for the update, Mr. Geller. So it was highlighted before in audit, wasn't it, that we had, as you say, we had an issue. And to my mind, one of the issues came around staff moving on, so churn and keeping an eye on. So do we now have a procedure in place to make sure that when somebody leaves, that's dealt with? Yes, we do. Okay. And the other thing was, can you remind me, because with regard to the safeguarding policy, it was due for an update, wasn't it? And I think we were overdue with that update. Am I right? Was it that we were supposed to have an update by now?
So the policy currently has the original date when it was the one on the internet.
Yeah.
Says 2020.
Right.
Now, like I said, we review it at all the safeguarding meetings. That the topic of the policy comes up. It is due for me for a proper refresh. Like I said, work for next year. I don't think we're over time on it as far as I'm aware, but I will double check.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Councillor White?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'd just like to say, Mr. Geller, that was a really good piece of work, and a lot of the charity work I do, I actually work with vulnerable people, so that's really good news. And I'd like to say 2 things, really. One is thank you so much for taking the time to turn up in person. As a member, I really appreciate that. It just shows that you're committed. And just to say again that we really, I'm sure all members, I speak for all of them, that we really do appreciate the work you and Mr. Swords do, and we're lucky to have both of you as officers here at Maldon. So thank you very much.
Hear, hear. Councillor Morley?
Yes, I'd like to thank you as well, because time and time again we hear the expression, which I hate, lessons will be learned and things like that, and I just hate that. And I like to think with the safeguarding officers, and I do remember this, about who checks them as well. Now, I know how far could you go, but no, brilliant. If you can keep that up, that's good, because I hate that expression, lessons will be learned, and it's tragic, Thank you.
Councillor Stephen?
Sorry, Chair, I think we ought to say for the record, in view of what we've just heard, that there isn't a safeguarding issue that's happened. We haven't had a child safety incident or something like that. It was around managing risks and potential things and not an actual incident. Just want to clarify that, please.
Good point. Right. Thank you, Mr. Keller. Thank you very much indeed. So, right. So I think that brings us to item 12. Any other items of business the chairperson of the committee decides are urgent, which I have none, unless anybody else has got anything they want to bring up. In which case, I thank you for your attendance and declare the meeting closed as at 08:20. Thank you, members.